Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the New Now. I am extremely delighted to have a first-time guest on our show, Neil Hague. He's graciously decided to take some time late in his night in England at 10 p.m., where I am early in my time in Japan. And we're going to discuss the very dreamy, shall we say, topic of Wetiko. Neil, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lorenzo. It's great. Nice to have me on the show. It's nice to meet you. That's the first time we've met, so it's great. It's lovely.
It is. We're 10 minutes into our new relationship, already getting along very well. And it's not so many people that I begin a relationship by asking them about what they believe in or feel for Wetiko and some definitions and some experiences. But here we go, Neil. Maybe you could enlighten our viewers a bit with your definition, what you've seen and found. And let's take it from there.
Well, let's look at it from different angles. I mean, we know that the Wetiko name is an American Indian name, of course. There's other names, and we know about people who know a little bit about my art or know a little bit about Gnosticism or, all of those subjects that relate to genies or the jinn in Islamic traditions. And there's other things that relate to other words as well. What I've found and what I've seen through my experience is that, and I've experienced it quite a few times over the years, that Wetiko is something that seeks to dominate the subconscious, the spaces between the five sense perception. It's something that is, it's kind of like, it's the bit, it tries to get in between the bit where the computer meets the operator, that kind of space in between. And it tends to hide in those places. It hides in the unseen. I've written a couple of books over the years. I've written graphic novels that have had themes and characters and entities and aliens and whatever you want to call it into these narratives and all this kind of thing. And I've described the Wetiko in all these different ways. But if you get down to its basic form, it is about consciousness and subconsciousness and a place that seeks to trigger us into other areas. It manipulates our thoughts. It lives in that low vibrational place, the bit that relates to psychopathic tendencies and where people get triggered into these states. It's usually something to do with an unseen vibrational field that could be like a virus in many ways, like a computer virus would affect the computer. And that in its simple terms, it's affecting the subconscious. It really is kind of going into these areas and manipulating the five senses, the thoughts and opinions. And if you look at everything in the world today, you start with the last 2 years, look at COVID and think about what's now happening. The majority of the time, people that are triggered into certain ways of thinking, more often than not, they're not their own thoughts. They are thoughts that are given to them by this unseen vibrational field, which is definitely non-human, Lorenzo. It's definitely not human, that's for sure. You could look at it that way. If you want to be really, really creative about it, you could go into the realms of aliens and the Sith and the Jedi and all these kind of science fiction things, which are not really science fiction if you peel a lot of the information back and look at it. I've written extensively in Orion's Door, which is about 800 pages, talking about all these subjects in relation to one constellation, Orion. So, it doesn't just stay with one constellation, of course, it's manifesting all the time. The book, I think the best book I read on Wetiko was Paul Levy's book, the one about dispelling the Wetiko and breaking the spell of evil. That is probably the best book. I've read other things, but that is one that is really, for me, was the one that said it all very simply. So, it's a fascinating subject. It's also something I think that gets in the way of people truly understanding who they really are, what we are, where we come from. It's Wetiko that I think in many ways creates the vibration of fear around death. and what death is. So you can go into those realms quite easily. Do you know, I also think it relates to the inorganic universe, the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force. Think about the subjects that are coming up at the moment with Russia and stuff. And I'm not saying that I would enjoy the fact that anybody would be invading anybody. It's outrageous, but we have to question whether everything is going on like they say it's going on, of course. But we're back to the old chestnut of nuclear energy, nuclear inorganic universe of worlds forming in that way. And are you aware of the Gnostic mythology, Lorenzo? The subjects around that?
I am. Maybe you can expand on it a little bit for our viewers, but yes.
Well, when I started looking into it from an artistic point of view, because I like getting into visual themes that relate to these unseen subjects. If I do a portrait, it has to, like the one behind me here, it has to be something that is not just a portrait. It has to be picking up on other vibrations and other energy and other unseen realms. So when I started looking at Gnostic teachings within the within the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Apocrypha of the Archons and all these different texts, and reading modern contemporary books as well, like what's his name, John Lash Lamb? Is it Lash Lamb or Lamb Lash? Anyway, but his book is really, really good. And I started to realize that what we were looking at, I felt, was the nature of consciousness personified into these worlds and realms that live in what we would call expanded awareness, higher consciousness, into the realms of, say, what the Gnostics called pleroma, the idea of the plenitude of plasma, 80 to 90% of the universe being plasma. And they talked about this particular upper levels of these worlds, which were what we would call heavens, the heavens, or heaven in any religious sense. And one part of the myth that really struck me was the what they call the fall of sapphire. That story of sapphire, which is the name for wisdom in the Greek word, where this aeon, this feminine divine aeon or goddess, fell into some kind of coma as she was dreaming the dream time, or dreaming into existence her creations. It's described as though she was dreaming, and in her dream she created, and in the creation process she had some kind of nightmare. She gave birth to something they call the anthropos, which is this kind of like, I say in the dream time, she gave birth to this state, this energy, this state of awareness, and then fell into this konoma, which is where we get the word coma from. And in that place, she had a nightmare, and according to the text, she gave birth to another god, which they called in the text Yaldabaoth, or the demiurge. And the demiurge, this god, became a kind of unwanted child, almost like a discarded fetus in this realms of the nebulas of the stars and the heavens. It was a kind of like a god that was rejected. You've seen these stories in superhero movies, the orphan child like Superman who grows up to be something else, So there was this rejected deity, which eventually, and I'm keeping this really simple, became the kind of fire and brimstone deity of the Old Testament, Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, Saturn, Satan, that kind of thing. So it's the fall of this kind of this level of awareness, which has been translated into other aspects, not least through the fall of the rebel angel and the Luciferian connection, which is also connected to the fall of Sapphire. So she kind of falls into this nightmare, into this state. And while she's in this state, she takes the form of the earth, and the deity that she's rejected is the kind of architect figure who, according to, I read one example of it, and I think it might have been Lam Lash's work, but the perfect analogy of somebody turning up at a building site, a foreman, saying that they've created all this, the arrogance of it, the arrogance of this deity. And out of all this process, this kind of mythology, this narrative, what the Gnostics call the archons were gathered to this particular creator, this deity. And the funny thing is, Lorenzo, when you look at the texts, and a couple of texts I've looked at, they describe this deity as being these deities as being inorganic, like the weak nuclear, strong nuclear, and describe them as being as lacking any creative imagination at all whatsoever, and also living in chaos, living in that world that has no clarity, but they're absolutely immaculate when it comes to mimicking life, creative life. And I'll give you an example of that. If you think of and this is also creative genius in some ways, but it's not creative imagination. If you imagine, in some ways, great vast forests, and then you see the trees as columns and pillars, and then you imagine the interiors of great cathedrals with their columns and pillars, that's a form of mimicking that is almost a kind of an artistic mimicking. But with the archons, it's much more sophisticated than that. It's more about inverting while mimicking. So the world as you see it is not the world as it was, and everything is upside down. And there's many examples of that. I won't go into that now, but it becomes a lifeless, inorganic reality when the archons are creating this situation. And I think there was a movie that came out based on the Hopi Indian language called, what was it called now? I think it was called Koyanatsikatsi, which means life in turmoil, or a life split in two, two hearts, a life out of balance, that kind of thing. And you look at the world and you look at people and you think about that kind of, that area, it's very much inspired by this Wetiko archon kind of inorganic, inverted reality. And there's plenty of examples of it, in terms of visual imagery and how things appear in this world that are not necessarily seen until they're really seen. It's amazing. Do you remember the faces that appeared in the Twin? Do you remember when the Twin Towers were hit apparently by plane? And do you remember the faces that appeared in the smoke?
I do.
And so that's the kind of image you can imagine, that these genies, you rub the bottle it's always three times, isn't it? Rubbing the bottle three times and out pops the genie. And the genie is the archon, and it is the force behind the Wetiko. And as you know from many myths and stories, you pay a price for setting free the genie in some ways. What's that song by Aguilera, Christina Aguilera? Was it Genie in the Bottle? You remember that modern song? I mean, it's all that kind of symbolism. And some of the Persian people that I've known over the years, and Arabic people that I've talked to, the jinn or the archons are not all bad. And that's where we get the notion of angels from, the idea of archangel. So you'll get the idea of an angel being in its dual form, could be either this or that, bad or good, on one level of reality. But when I come back to Wetiko, I think about the type of force behind everything, behind it all, the vibration. I can share a couple of pictures with you. Can I do that? I'll just so your viewers can get an idea of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
So if I go to a particular picture, like something like that, can you all see that? So you've got this idea of this invisible face that is directing and manipulating. In this sense, it's the modern world. I've called it the cybergrid world, the cybergrid empire in my book, Orion's Door, where everything is drawn onto this force. There are other examples of Wetiko there from the movies, like in The Matrix, where Agent Smith takes on an archon form. He goes from human form to the typically fire archon form, because most of the ancient cultures that talked about these things, they knew that the genie or the Wetiko inspired or archon could actually manipulate fire, air, water, or earth. In fact, in some cultures, they're called princes of the air or Prince Liberium. I'll give you a good example. Let me find the image I want to show you. Where is it? I've got to go back into this to show you. So, for example, Wetiko, I'm sliding through these. So, for example, there you go. Wetiko is everything. It's hell on earth. It's a mind virus. I created this imagery last year for David Icke. Some of this imagery, and I think he's used one or two of these pieces in his presentations. So that's a good example. But I wanted to show you, and this is another example of Wetiko as a lower vibration. But I wanted to show you something that I witnessed with about another 25 people in Peru in 2012.
Okay.
Which has been shown a couple of times, but not to this extent. So let me just get my glasses and find the slide for you. I think it's, let's see, somewhere. Let me go into this. It's difficult on a pad, Lorenzo, because I'm not using the computer today. I'm just trying to find it without, without kind of.
These are all good examples. Anyway,
they're all good images. Yeah. By the way, just while I'm on these slides, the demiurge I mentioned a minute ago is actually described as a lion in the Apocryphon of the Archons. And when you see images like this on the Bank of England in the UK, these lions of Babylon are actually controlling the flow of the pleroma, the plenitude, the money, the flow of energy. So when you see lions in these ways, as rampant lions, as phantoms and demonic, they're actually representations of the demiurge in that sense. And there's a great quote of that I could find. That's why I painted the lion in that way, because I wanted the lion. I wanted to reverse the damage, the image in that sense when I put these images together. So anyway, I'm distracting myself. I was looking for this particular thing. Let me just see where it is. It is, I think it's just here. I mean, just in the right space. Here we are. So yeah, when I was in Peru in 2012, a group of people gathered at these sacred sites. And this one in particular is the gate of Lord Amaru. It's the Devil's Gate, it's called in the native language. And behind there, you can see Lake Titicaca. You can see it's the highest point on the planet in many ways. A lot of UFO activity there. But can you see the image above of the rock? Yes. It looks like a man laying on his back with a big belly. If you look closely at at this side here, you'll see the dragon's head.
Interesting.
And then here you'll see the dinosaur skull. Can you see with the teeth and the eye? Yeah. And you can see an eye, nose, and a chin looking upwards as well.
Yes.
So that the actual red rock all over the world, red rock is infused in this kind of vibrational field going back to the ancient world. And they say this is nature. I don't think it's nature, especially when you see things like this penis on the bottom left-hand corner there. I don't think that's been carved by the brain. There's other forces at work. When I was there, it was like Skeletor's castle, the He-Man kind of Skeletor's castle. Sure. So, without going into great detail, there was a kind of an energy work that we were doing as a group of people. And we were round the back of this face here. If you turn it on its side, you can see that. And after a period of time, when we were doing this work, let's say we were doing some kind of vibrational healing work, because there'd been something happened the day before, which was a possession, which I'll not go into, but there was something that happened to somebody on the trip. And we went back, and this is what appeared in the sky above us. It burst through the clouds. Can you see that?
Yes.
Now, can you see the face within the face within the face? I mean, you've got what looks like a kind of a set of teeth, but you've got like a grey alien-like face, a grimace.
Yes.
It actually morphed at one point into a skull. Can you see the skull there in the middle?
Yes.
And you can see it there looking down at us, like its profile with its two eyes and its nose. This appeared, it burst through the clouds. There was no natural reason for this to be there, apart from the fact that we as a group had done the energy work on the rocks and in that area, and it had actually appeared to us like these things do. It's pure Wetiko in that sense, Lorenzo. It's pure Wetiko. And you can see it. It was like a kind of a trickster energy, like it had malice. And that's another essence of the Wetiko, the trickster character. So you see that with the genie and the jinn and so on and so on. So I'll stop sharing. I'll come back to me. But you get the idea. I mean, that was an event that really, I mean, when that happened, what was it, 10 years ago now, when that happened, it really made me start to question things. I mean, I already knew about reality in as much that I was kind of raised as a kid understanding spiritual things like, spirits and ghosts and all the rest of it. But getting into it as you get older and wiser and looking into material, you start to really look through it. And being an art historian and a painter as well, I found examples in art and paintings, tons of stuff, which, once you, like you say in the movies, like The Matrix, that's a good Gnostic story, The Matrix. All of those are really good. So, yeah.
For sure.
I've gone on and on there.
No.
This is. You want to ask me other questions?
No, that's perfect. I would say it. The mental viral invader is pretty much been missed for most people when they've watched what's gone on for the last couple of years, and you're kind of giving, in my opinion, people a good handle on what to look for as far as when they're asking questions as to why things are the way they are and what's going on, and how can politicians be so stupid? How can the rules be so obviously damaging? How can the mandates be so obviously unhealthy? And and so many people are saying that politicians don't understand the problems they're causing, and of course they do. Of course it's being done on purpose, right? And what would your take on the last couple of years in relation to what you're showing us, in relation to where we are now, and maybe in relation to where people need to go? We want to tie that in a little bit.
Well, the thing is, with what's been going on for 2 years, or thereabouts, it's been a huge onslaught. It's a war on humanity in many ways. It's a war on so many different fronts. It's not just the obvious mental onslaught. I mean, the fallout in terms of mental health because of the COVID rollout as such is one thing, but it's also done a lot of other damage to the heart and mind of people, except for those that were strong in the first place, and they were born of this knowledge, born of spirit, as I say. They're the ones that were already there. They were the ones they're the ones that it quite rightly says in the New Testament, the first shall be last and the last shall be first, because they already knew what was going on. And for the ones that have had their heads messed with big time as a psyop, because that's what it was, whether you agree with, whether you think there was something, or I don't really think there was anything but some kind of vibrational implant, almost like a vibrational alteration of something that we collectively tap into. The panic and the fear can cause so much damage, to our minds. And you can get somebody with flu thinking they've got the bubonic plague.
Yeah.
And then you can get some people that are really seriously unwell anyway, and they do get the flu, and they may well have been okay with it to a certain extent, but because of the rules and restrictions and all the things that have been happening, denying people the usual human care and love and tenderness, like hospital visits and all the other stuff, that will have finished people off also, where people would have normally been okay. And there we mentioned the fallout from the state injectables, and all the other stuff that's been added to the mix. So for me, it's been one huge operation based on something that was always going to come along at some point, because they'd already set their stall out, and it was just a matter of time when the mantra and the spells were being cast for the people to consume and make it their reality. Because, have you noticed lately, there's hardly any mention of COVID.
Yeah.
It's all now Russia. So it's so obvious to anybody who's awake, and even those that are actually, kind of let's call it lightly sleeping with the odd snore, but they kind of know there's something not right. You know, they're waking up at night at 3 a.m. and then falling back to sleep, you know, as an analogy. And they know something's not right, because where did ISIS go? Gone. Where did, COVID for 2 years, where did COVID restrictions all been lifted? Because it's part of a movie script as such. And it's scripted in as much that it's very connected to the scriptures in that way. There's a connection if you look closely. And so I don't expect anything now apart from more demonization and polarization and people being caught up in the chess game of black against white or white against black. I mean, there was a newspaper article, Lorenzo, in the UK. There's a cover of a mainstream tabloid, which is ridiculous. I saw it the other day, and it just said on the front, "The free world versus Putin." Wait a minute, the free world. It's like, I mean, I know this was ridiculous, this newspaper. Anyway, it's a bloody, almost as intelligent as the Beano or Dandy, you know, the kids' comics. But what exactly, which part of the free world are we talking about? Are we talking about free Australia, free Canada, you know, free France? I mean, the fascism on the streets everywhere for almost 2 years. So these people expect us to be stupid. They expect stupidity. They think we're stupid. And sadly enough, there are a majority of people that do buy into it, and they do take it all very seriously and continue to take it seriously, even when things disappear. And I'll give you a beautiful analogy of this. I was reading some papers not that long ago about experiments done by a German psychiatrist decades ago. And they were talking about a farmer, or using a farmer and his sheep as an analogy. And basically, when the farmer was bringing the sheep back into the farm every day, or when they did that, as part of the experiment, they put a plank of wood in the road.
Pardon me?
They put a piece of wood in the road.
Okay.
And every time the sheep were approaching the gate, all the sheep would jump over the wood, of course. They'd like little skip. They'd all jump over this piece of wood as they were going back home. And then they would eventually, the next day or whenever, they took the plank of wood away. It disappeared. The farmer took it away. But every time the sheep got to that spot where the wood was, even days and weeks later, they just kept jumping over an invisible plank that wasn't there. And this is the same as these characters in Europe and in the West, walking around with their mask on still, and doing all the other stuff that they were trained to do as part of the behavioral psychology that's been thrust upon them for 18 months. It's all been about that. So the good news is, whenever we have these kind of onslaughts on us as a collective, then there is a great opportunity at any point, like there is at the moment with the Russia scenario, to actually realize that there could be something quite amazing and beautiful come out of this. Almost like people could really see the light, because you need the darkness in some ways to really see the light. You know, you have to have so much light to be able to pick up on the darkness. It's a two-way process. So we're staring at a good few years, and I've said it in my book and other people I know have said it, we're staring at a few years of where this Wetiko vibration, which is manifesting in human form, of course, through political leaders and through the people behind the scenes, where they're going to throw everything at humanity. They're going to throw the kitchen sink at us, because that's all they've got left. They've run out of time. There's no more time. There's no more time for us. There's no more time for them. The cycle is coming to an end, and therefore they're pulling time towards them. And I reckon not least through technology they've got, like, you know, various technological kind of scientific kind of far out 100 years in the future, as we would perceive it, technology to be able to manipulate time, like they can manipulate the weather, like all these things can be manipulated on a different frequency. However, the good news for that, with that, is that we can see that occurring. And my feeling, Lorenzo, is that we're going to have a point at some point in the future where it looks incredibly dire, like it looks like we've reached the lowest of the low, like a third world war. However, it won't fully manifest for a whole range of reasons, not least one. I really do believe that there will be some kind of divine intervention. And when I say that, I don't mean somebody coming to save us. I'm talking about consciousness reaching a point where it actually tips the balance the other way, and we actually see ourselves and we see the plight and the world in a way that we are really meant to be living like, not this kind of fake illusory construct that we've been born into. But there's another world, another reality. You could see it like, if you want to put a sci-fi spin on it, you could see it like future versions of ourselves coming back to us and actually saying, we're you and you are us, that kind of thing, if you want to look at it that way. But before we get to that point, and before we get to this date, I call it a Kabbalistic agenda, because we're dealing with something that is very magical and mysterious in terms of spells. Before we get to the 2030, 2035 kind of almost messianic era that is being pushed politically, a one world government, I think we're in for a few treats between now and then.
What do you mean? Like, I mean, maybe we are that divine intervention. It seems to me like people like yourself and what I get to share here and what other people are so-called waking up. I don't like to use the term, but it's more like becoming conscious of their potential.
Yeah, I mean, it is that. That's why that's why I said it's more about higher consciousness.
Yes.
It's about super consciousness, that it is a savior archetype, because in that sense, we would be repeating the old cycles and we wouldn't be fully accessing what we're really constructed out of, who we really are. We're all that exists. We're part of every aspect of everything that has ever existed. If you look at macrocosm and microcosm, whether you see it as the bronchals, in your lungs, to upside down trees compared to the forests. We're in a forest that's in a forest of stars, which is in a vast forest of galaxies, and so on. If you magnify the skin and look at it closely, it looks like the surface of a wind-blown desert. Everything is connected. Gaseous pillars, nebulas look like microbes. Vine leaves can look like aerial photographs of rivers. Brain cells can be stars. What I'm trying to say is that there's an inner and outer aspect of everything that we're connected to. And I think it was Rudolf Steiner that said the ego and the sun are the inner and outer aspects of the same being. What orbits out there through space, the sun, is the cosmic eye, and that lives within me. It lives within all humans. So it's that kind of understanding, I think, that is coming. It's a spirituality that we're crying out for. It's kind of like we're thirsty for more, and the people that are thirsty will drink more of this up, and the ones, sadly, that don't want to drink, well, the world that awaits them will be whatever world they've chosen to create. It won't be the one that I've chosen to create, or you, or any of your listeners. So, it's all about, for me, it's always been about that kind of creative spark and that creative imagination, and that inner knowing. It's really important that people understand that if they can get in touch with their kind of like childlike abilities, their inner sort of states of wonder. Do you know what I mean? Like a kind of be absorbed in everything, be enchanted by every facet of life, okay, give and take, things do piss us off sometimes and things do get to us, but it's balancing the books, it's making sure that we understand this deeper side to who we are, because that's the only thing, as far as I can see, that will actually activate our own kind of personal mythology and activate that super consciousness and what the Gnostics talked about as the sapphire correction. So in other words, Gaia, the wisdom of the earth, actually comes back into full bloom. And this is why I've said for years, I wouldn't be surprised to find some kind of pushback from the earth itself as a collective based on collective consciousness. And I've seen various visions over the years. There's two that stand out in my mind. One was, and this is when I was a young man and I had no knowledge of any of this stuff. I was about 20-ish, something like that. And I remember waking from a dream. I was sleeping on a friend's sofa and I woke from a dream, and I was crying. It was very emotional, this dream. And I didn't know why. I couldn't get my head around it at the time because it had no bearing on my life. But what I saw was a great multitude of people gathering, an enormous multitude. I mean, thousands and thousands, but not millions, thousands. And they were all on a high plateau. They were on this plateau, and on this plateau, they were bathed in what looked like some kind of rainbow-like, almost like the Northern Lights, this rainbow light. And I could see amongst the crowd, there were certain individuals that I now recognize today that I didn't know back then, without going into detail. But I knew from the reason why the tears came and the emotions, it was over. The actual plight was over. We'd reached the mountaintop. It was finished. And I know with all my heart that this will be over. It will be over, and we will see the fruits of this at some point within the next decade. It will all be over, and something else awaits us. And based on that, there's no need to be fearful of what's coming, because what's coming is what we wanted. We need to get back to this place, which is deep spirituality, not the religious stuff, the deeper understanding of who we are. Now, the other vision, which ties in with that, I saw something, and I mentioned this recently in a video. I saw what seemed to be a fire in the sky, which I thought was a missile. It could have been a comet. I've painted these subjects, Lorenzo. They're in my paintings. But I saw these decades ago. And it's interesting because a friend contacted me recently, had seen the video, and put me onto something which I'd forgotten about, which was a Lakota myth. You know, like the Hopi prophecies? Well, there was the Hopi and the Lakota. The American Indians are pretty much the same people, like the Slavs are the same people over in Russia. The native people had these visions, and there was one particular vision of Crazy Horse, the Lakota holy man warrior, where he talks through a series of events. But the most important part is he supposedly had said that there was a blinding flash of light, and there was ash and gourds fell to the ground, and then it was over. Everything was over. In other words, a new world awaited. Now, you could take that negatively. You could say that's a nuclear explosion. You could say it's the atomic bomb. You can take it how you want. I see it personally as something that I saw also while I was on a flight in the last 10 years, tied in with the same visions, where I saw what seemed to be like a kind of a flare, like a solar flare, but it wasn't a physical flare. It was more like a blinding, energetic flare that activated almost like a switch in everybody. It was almost like a kind of the light going on, the light switch going on kind of symbolism. And it was as though once the switch went on, people wouldn't see the world the same ever again. It was almost as though that was part of the divine intervention. So I'm not waiting for some God in the sky with a big switch. I'm not talking about that. And it could well be there's some kind of energetic, going back to the personification of these nebulas and stars and these other things I've written about, there could be something that is deeply connected to what we are as human beings, like in the Judaic tradition of the original Adam, the higher Adam, the heavenly Adam, the Gan Eden, you know, the woman and the man of the stars that eventually come into physical form, which is what Orion is about in many ways. It could well be that we are going to be activated purely by some kind of codes that are part of the, what do they call them? The photonic aspect of light itself. The sun is a giant portal. It's almost a projector. We think we understand things, you know, and with all humility and honesty, we don't. And you have people that would probably, science and religious people that would say they understand things, but we don't really understand the forces behind these giant, what seem like giant objects that have been positioned into place, whether they're moons or stars or, you know, or suns. We all this stuff is actually greater than us. But the fact that we have imagination and we have this ability to be able to comprehend this stuff is what is really separates us from other sentient beings. You know, so I'll read you a quote. I've just got it. Yeah, I put this here for this.
Okay.
So, have you heard of Saint Gildas from about 400 AD? One of the early kind of Christian fathers, a monk. He said, "Thoughts are things. Imagination is experience. Accept this, and the gateway to other worlds will slowly swing wide open for you, and that each day will bring forth new wonders, so that you become more as a child, absorbed, enchanted by all there is of which to learn." And I remember that. It's a little bit like the Socrates saying of wisdom is knowing how little we know. And I always think of that because it keeps me kind of grounded in everything that I do as well. You know, I have to be. I mean, I love going off on one, but you have to come back to this understanding that, you know, we are something that is above and beyond what we could ever dream of in that sense. So yeah, as an artist, Lorenzo, I've given lots of things, lots of thoughts. Some artists are good at doing that. You know, they kind of get into all sorts of subjects. I got away with teaching the history of everything through teaching the history of art. It was kind of a fascinating thing for me to do. You know, it was something that I don't do so much now. I put it into writing, but in my images and dreams, in my graphic novels, I've seen all these kind of forces personified in such a way that they're meant to give hope, but it's beyond hope, really. It's more about an inner knowing, you know, like a real knowing that everything is going to be what it is meant to be. I'll share one last image with you of what I'm talking about. There's one image here. I can find it, and it's basically it's right at the end of the presentation. So if I go right to the end. I just need to move this. Hold on. Here we go.
No worries.
It's very difficult to get to it without, I have to slide the screen, and then the problem is the screen slows down. Interesting image. You will have seen it before.
We've lost your live picture. We have an image.
Have we? Yeah. Okay. It must be the connection. That's all. I'm just going to scroll. I'm just going to scroll because I can't actually. For some reason, it keeps shooting back to certain images. It won't allow me to get to the image.
Okay.
There we go. Why won't it allow me to go back to that? I mean, this is an idea of it, but it's not the image I want to show you. I mentioned all these things a minute ago. We're nearly there. We're nearly there. We're
no,
nearly there.
that's an interesting
We're nearly
picture.
there. All these images are relevant to what I'm explaining. You know, the idea of other forces shaping our reality,
Right.
born of stellar consciousness, coming out of nebulas. I saw them as lions. I mean, to give you an idea, look at the size of Regulus in mainstream science compared to the Sun and Jupiter. You know, and that's a small star, Regulus. It's not a large supernova. You know, Betelgeuse in Orion is about to go supernova anytime. And these lions I painted, one of the images I saw in a dream were lions that were so giant-like, sleeping in what looked like a wormhole. And once they were awakened, they would create this process, not those particular ones in the image, but this process would start that I've been describing, this awakening process, this actual light going on, cleansing various entities and bodies, entering the matrix and actually dispelling the demonic Wetiko vibration, which is symbolized in the red images there. In that sense, there's a greater power connected to us. And whether it's this flare that I was talking about, or the awakening of sapphire on the right there, as the earth awakens and sheds that vibrational field that has been created by this Wetiko vibration, as we do the same as individuals, we're in a situation then where we see this. Can you see this one?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is what I mean by the hand of super consciousness placing back at the center of the stem of the pineal as the serpent rides up the tree of life. And the image on the left, the green image, is a projection out of the maze of the left brain.
Right.
You can see it on many levels. Once that white stone goes back in the tree, once that happens, the light that Crazy Horse saw, or what I've seen and other people have seen, at that point, our plight and the world as we knew it ceases to exist. The world is a very different place for those people that can truly see, and they can see this new world, this state of awakening. I always felt there was a comet connected to this time, and you'll notice there's a comet on the right-hand side there as well, which could have been already and passed us, but comets are passing all the time. But this was an ancient comet. Could be the fire in the sky. But that image is the image I wanted to share with you. So, you know, this last image here, just to kind of sum up, you know, the infinite awareness, the divine intervention I was talking about, or our own love for ourselves, this infinite love, it's this that will end the Wetiko vibration. It will all end, kind of like being bathed in those lights that I talked about earlier. It ends when we end it, when we stop responding through our minds to what we're being shown in a way that Wetiko wants us to see the world. It ends when we end it, in that sense. So that's the last slide. I haven't really done this as a slideshow, but I love that. I found that the moment you reach super consciousness, your light will shine. And that's the point. I think that's what you were hinting at, Lorenzo. I'll just come back and put my video back. That's what I mean by this light going on. It's the light within ourselves, this super consciousness that will dispel all things Wetiko, in my view.
I would agree. This is it's amazing talking with you, Neil, in that you basically answered all my questions as soon as they came up. I didn't even have to ask them. Quite literally, I have a list of questions as we're chatting, and just as I'm about to ask, you've answered them. Like pretty much. Yeah, it's pretty.
It was meant to be. It was meant to be then. That's great.
Yeah, pretty much from beginning to end. I mean, I was going to ask how people can get over being stupid, how they can grow into their own consciousness, how they can delve beyond the illusions of the time, you know, how they can heal their own wounds, whether they be physical or vibrational, you know, putting all that together. And I would say throughout this lovely hour of chat, you've given people just about all the answers that they could require, at the very least, to begin their journey.
I'm so pleased to be able to do it. I love this. I love talking about my paintings. I love talking to people like you. I mean, we'll talk again. I'm hoping we can do another one at some point. We can talk about other things, when the time comes.
I saw one of your images, which I would really like to delve into more, when we saw the wavy pattern over sand. One of the images you brought up on the screen.
Right.
Last, when I was flying in an airplane to South America at the time, like this was maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, I remember looking out the window and seeing that exact pattern on a mountain. And it blew me away because I'd never seen anything like that, in live before. And it just showed me, things are more than you can.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Once you start, I have lots of scientific journals and books and stuff that I look for picture reference. And I've come across so many of those wonderful examples of what you could say in a religious sense is this idea of the house of many mansions.
Yes.
This idea of different levels. The hologram at work is a beautiful analogy of the hologram, because it is a hologram. If you take, why wouldn't the skin magnified be like the desert? That's a hologram. So we're living in a hologram, which doesn't have to be a despicable Wetiko infused place. It can be actually the most beautiful hologram. At the end of it all, it's what we choose to make it. So, but I've seen things on planes as well, Lorenzo. I've seen stuff like that. I've noticed that you observe things from a height like that over the years. It gives you a different perspective. There was a couple of times flying over America where I kept seeing I went on a lot of flights 10 years ago, and I kept seeing a particular formation of rocks in the area, which looked like the Four Corners area. I didn't know. I was flying between, it was over New Mexico, Arizona, that area. And I kept seeing this rock, and I photographed it. And I've got prints of it on one of my notice boards, huge prints of this particular rock from the window of the plane at the time. And not that much time afterwards, maybe a year afterwards, I was privileged enough to actually touch base or put my feet on the desert and I was on a road trip with a dear friend at the time. And we ended up at the place. We ended up at the place that I'd been seeing several times from the air. It was a place called Ship Rock in New Mexico. I think it is the borders of New Mexico, Arizona. And it's an amazing cross. It's like a cross image made out of what looks like a volcanic plume of some kind. But there was something about that place. I was drawn to it energetically, like the examples of red rock I showed you. And it's funny, to this day, it's kind of like a couple of things follow me around, and I'm not aware of it until I'm aware of it. Anything to do with an eagle, symbols of eagles, which I've painted as well, and anything to do with lions, the eagle and the lion seems to follow me around imagery-wise. And when I looked at the rock and the myth behind it, I didn't know anything about it. But according to Navajo myth, it was the home of a giant eagle, in terms of its energy, its unseen status. So I like that. It pleased me greatly.
I can see 10 different videos coming from this video, and some of the points that I've made. Other areas I would love to delve into with you. In my dreams and images sounds like something that would be very fascinating for us to get.
Yeah.
So hold on. Could you pause for 1 second before? Well, Neil, we've touched upon so many beautiful and wonderful things. As the sun's coming up here, it's my dawn. I guess it's the middle of your night, and I would be honored and delighted to further explore deeper onto some of the topics you've talked about, because a lot of the images you brought hundreds of side questions for me, for another conversation. Perhaps for our viewers, though, you could send me some links and some images to some of the articles you mentioned, to your book as well, of course. I mean, I do have your website. That quote you read, I would love to get a copy of that as well, to maybe print underneath this video for our viewers to see, the one about being, childlike without being childish. Yeah, for me, because it's all struck home very well. And I have to say, it's a genuine honor to hear your wisdom and your experiences, and, get a chance on a personal level to get to meet you and see what you've done and created and where you're going in your life.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for saying that. Thank you. It's basically been lovely to chat to you about all these things. I'll send you everything. I'll send you the pictures, the links, whatever you want for the presentation. It's an honor and a privilege to be given time to talk about things like this. So I really, thank you from the bottom of my heart, giving the time that you do and doing what you do, making this space to do this. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think seeing those thousands and what's possible, giving people, I don't like to use the word hope, because you got to create your way out of things, in my opinion, but allowing people to see that there is a way out if they choose to make it and create it and act on it for themselves is the best of all things that we get to share, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Be creative, people. Get creative in whatever way you can, and be at peace. That's the other aspect of this, especially at these times now. To find that inner peace is so important.
I would agree. Well, Neil, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Once again, I'll get this out as soon as I possibly can to everyone. And if anyone has any questions for Neil, any suggestions for future chats, or anything at all they'd like to share, please leave it in the comments or send me an email. If we want to reach out to Neil, I'll be happy to pass any messages along to him as well. Thank you all. Thank you again, Neil.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.